Good evening. Sure good to see all of you tonight. Happy to have the opportunity to teach another portion of God's Word. On the lesson this evening, we're in Matthew chapter 28. I think we left off last time at verse 9 of chapter 28, where Jesus makes his appearance to the women after his resurrection from the dead. Before we enter into our study, we want to prepare our minds with the word of prayer. Well, ask Brother Matt to direct my minds. Amen. All right. We'll start off by just kind of catching up with the context here in chapter 28 that we've studied already. Verse 1, now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. The angel said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who has been crucified. He is not here, for he has risen just as he said. Come, see the place where he was lying. Go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, and behold, I have told you. That brings us up then to verse 9. In Matthew's Gospel, he only records 2 appearances of Jesus. There are 10 of them, of course, altogether, that are recorded in the Scriptures where Jesus appeared. He tells us about the appearance to the women that were running from the tomb, and also leaving the tomb on their way to tell the disciples, which is recorded here. And then Jesus' appearance on a mountain in Galilee, where Paul says he appeared to 500 brethren at one time. And that seems to be that occurrence that's recorded here in Matthew. So a lot of material in the other Gospels. It says, and behold, Jesus met them and greeted them, and they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. So we know that there's been enough time passed that Jesus had risen from the dead. The angel rolled away the stone. The soldiers became like dead men, and then at some point they fled from the tomb. And then the women see the tomb open. Mary Magdalene runs to get John and Paul or Peter to tell them what happened. The other women go on to the tomb, as we've studied earlier, and the angel speaks to them and tells them that they are looking for Jesus, but he's not there. He's been raised from the dead. And they went in and saw the inside of the tomb, and then they're told that they should go tell his brethren about his resurrection. And the angel is the one that's giving them this message and tells them that he is alive. So in great joy they leave the tomb. And meanwhile, right after they leave, evidently, is when Peter and John run up. And they see the tomb open, and John gets there first, and then Peter runs in, and then Peter follows him, Peter runs in, then John follows him, and they see the grave closed, see that the tomb is empty, and then they leave the tomb, and I guess go to tell the other disciples about what they've seen. And then Mary Magdalene, who's already run one direction, now she's come back to the tomb after Peter and John, and she is weeping and sees the 2 angels that look like young men sitting inside the tomb. And they ask her why she's weeping, and then Jesus appears behind her. And when he speaks her name, she recognized he was raised from the dead and grabbed a hold of him. And she's given the message to go and take this news to the disciples. So there's a lot of going on already that's happened before Jesus appears to the other women that are on their way to tell the disciples. So it's just like one thing right after another is going on early on that first day of the week. And so now this would be the second appearance of Jesus to somebody. He'd already appeared to Mary Magdalene at the tomb, and now on the way he appears to the other women. And so there's been time enough passed for all of those things to take place when what you read in verse 9 happens. And it very unexpected. You know, they know that he's raised from the dead, and they're full of all kinds of fear and excitement after seeing the angel. And unexpectedly, there he is. And it's been pointed out, that's the way it's going to be on the last day. You know, we're going to see a day like that. Boom. We're either going to be raised and changed and go to meet him, or he's going to come in the sky and we're going to be changed and meet him, but it's going to happen just as surprisingly for us. And here it is that these women see him on the road, and he greets them, saying, rejoice is the word for the greeting that is given there. And then he says, hello, or hail is the second part of the greeting. So he says to them, hail or hello or be well is sort of a unique greeting that is given there. And it's given in the imperative. It's a lot like our good morning that we would say to somebody. Hail. Have a good day. Whatever. When the Lord appears. Isn't that an interesting normal expression for him to give to them as he appears to them? And then the women receive his first appearance there. They love him. They've gone to anoint his body. And, you know, they were full of such sorrow that he had passed. And then they've gotten the news from the angel. And now they actually see him. And he speaks a word to them. Can you imagine the kind of emotion that they're feeling when they see the Lord raised up from the dead? And then they fall down at his feet and worship him. And that would be certainly a natural reaction when you see the risen Lord and he is back from the dead. You just fall down in front of him. They fall down and they reach out and grab his feet. So he's not a ghost. They're actually able to touch him and know that it's actually got a body. I guess those nail scars were in his feet when they were reaching out and grabbing his feet, because he shows it to the other disciples later, his hands and his feet. They can see that it's the Jesus that was indeed crucified. So the statement is made in the book of Psalms that we should do homage to the Son in Psalms chapter 2, that we ought to worship the Son, the Anointed One. So it shows his divine character is even talked about in the Old Testament, that he has this divine nature. He is worthy of worship. Anybody else would say, whether it was John the Apostle or any of the prophets, that they would have told you to get up. Don't do that. I'm just a man. I have the same nature as you. But Jesus doesn't do that, because he's not just like us. Yeah, he shares all of our humanity, but he's also God. And he can accept worship, and it's proper and right to worship Jesus. So they fall at his feet. And here you have the first worship, I guess you could say, of Jesus on the first day of the week. I don't know, maybe you could count Mary Magdalene first, but they all had shown this great reverence for him. And so far, all of the appearances are to women. Isn't that an honor to the female sex, that they're the ones that Jesus appears to first? They had been such devoted followers and such faith. And the Lord's no respecter of persons, is he? He loves us all the same. And he appears to them first. They're the first ones that get to take the message of the good news to the other disciples and say, Jesus is raised from the dead. We've seen him. We've touched him. And carry that message. So he is physically alive. We've personally touched him. And he goes on to tell them, Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go and take word to my brethren to leave for Galilee, and there they will see me. So don't be afraid. And we've heard about their fear at the tomb, and I'm sure there was fear and trembling when they saw the Lord. and they're full of all kinds of anxiety about the things that are happening. And don't be afraid. How many times does the Lord say that to all of us? Don't stop being afraid. Don't be afraid. I guess we all need it. They certainly needed it. A lot of things that are fearful. No reason to be afraid. The Lord has conquered death. You know, He is the one that has the keys of death and Hades. So no reason to be afraid. The victory is won over sin and over death. And now it's time to have a new unshakable confidence, all of us. Not just those women, but all of us that believe in Jesus Christ. We're going to win in the end. So if we stick with the Lord, we know for sure how things are all going to turn out for us. So don't be afraid. Stay with Jesus and everything's going to be good. Again, that exhortation is given to us many times in the Scripture. That resurrection power is available. It's been demonstrated. It's going to be used for all of us someday. And then he says, go and tell my brethren. And that seems to be talking about his disciples. Although his physical brethren, although they hadn't believed him during his ministry, they're also going to be spiritual brethren too, because they are going to see him raised from the dead. They're going to be there among the disciples when the Holy Spirit comes, and you know that they become spiritual brethren too, not just physical brethren. You know, we all hope our children that are born into the world, that we can teach them the gospel, and they'll be not only our children but our brethren too, right? Same kind of thing. And so, my brothers, and Jesus is not ashamed to call us brethren. We're told in Hebrews chapter 2. What a blessing that God's own Son would call us brethren, that we could be called children of God. That's what it's just a mind-blowing thing that people that have sinned, and we've made so many mistakes and done so many things wrong, and yet the Lord saves us and lets us be counted as His brethren, His brothers and sisters in a spiritual sense. So he had said earlier that those that do the will of God are His brother and His mother and His sister. And here you have that same expression used. Anybody else have a thought on the things we've been talking about? We already mentioned some earth-shaking things here already that happen in these two verses here. Anybody else have a thought or question? So even though the disciples had deserted him after he got arrested, they're still his brethren. Isn't that a good thing to know? Even when we let the Lord down, He still loves us. He wants us to turn again and come back to Him. And He doesn't treat us like enemies. He treats us like brothers that need to be admonished to come back. I'm thankful He still loves me even when I make mistakes. He wants me back. And same for all of us, isn't it? And, he says, they're my brethren. You go tell them this good news. And we'll go back to Galilee. And he's mentioned this when he was at the Last Supper with them. You remember he told them then that he's going to go before them to Galilee. So that he's going to die, and that's certainly going to happen. And all these desertion and denials and all that's going to happen. But I'm going to go before you to Galilee, he said back in chapter 26. And here you have that mentioned by the angel. He's going to Galilee. You got to, after this feast is over, you go back home, and the Lord's going to meet you there. And evidently, He had talked to them about this before. There's a certain mountain that He's going to appear to them on, and all those disciples up there in Galilee are going to be able to see the Lord after He's been raised from the dead. Those that can gather on that mountain there. So they got 2 more Sundays of appearances in Jerusalem first. So ultimately the feast is going to be over. They have another week of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then after that, pilgrims will go back to Galilee. And He gives them this assurance that He's going to be there. On this first day of the week, He's already appeared to Mary. He appears to the women. He appears to Peter. Appears to James at some time. We don't know for sure when. And he appears to the 2 disciples on the road on this same day. He appears to 10 of the apostles in the upper room that night. So there's going to be a lot more things happen after this happens. And 1 week later, he appears to the 11 because Thomas wasn't there on this first day of the week with them, the scene. So 1 week later, they're still in Jerusalem, and he appears to them. So we know this appearance in Galilee is going to be at least over a week away, that he's going to appear to them there. And again, we don't know the exact date of that appearance on the mountain. It's going to be recorded later here. So a heartening reminder that he's going to appear to them, just as he prophesied. And again, their despondency and their sadness and how dejected they all were. They're getting brought out of this deep depression they've been in for the last day and a half since he was crucified and all those things happened. They're hearing words from Mary Magdalene, and they're hearing from the women, and now they're hearing this message about meeting them in Galilee. And then he's going to appear himself to them. So they're going to be awoken out of this to this joy gradually, building up to what's going to happen. The message is not just for the disciples there in Jerusalem, but it's also for those that are going to return back to Galilee. We're going to see that on the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem, there are 120 brethren. There are over 500 in Galilee. So not all of them were in Jerusalem when that happened. There are a lot up there in Galilee as well that'll see the Lord. Again, the statement is made in the book of 1 Corinthians. Shelton, can you read that 1 Corinthians passage 27 through 30, or through 29 there? It talks about the message of the gospel, how the Lord does things. So it's not some super messenger, some prince or something, I guess, that takes the news of the resurrection out first. It's these lowly women that have followed the Lord and been his disciples. They're the ones that are chosen to share the gospel for the first time. So it sort of foreshadows the way the gospel works. We're just, like the apostles say, we just have this message in earthen vessels, but we're carrying a great prize. It's not about the messenger of the gospel, is it? It's about the gospel itself that has the power. And this great word that they're bringing. Any other thoughts on this appearance to the women here? In verse 11, then we go to what happens with the guards. And it's only in Matthew that we hear about this, that he gives us any of these details. He's writing to the Jews, and they have had this story circulated among them about the guards saying that they were asleep and the disciples stole his body. And so in Matthew's gospel written to the Jews, he's the one that mentions the story and where it originated from. And that it's a hoax. It was something that was paid for with money to get them to say this ridiculous thing that it is contradictory on its face. So he gives us the background about what happened with the guards. And we're thankful that he did. It's one of those, it's so great that the Gospels don't all just repeat the same thing. They give us all of this different information in each Gospel that we're able to study and put together. So in verse 11, we see their testimony about the empty tomb. It's not just the women that say the tomb is empty or the apostles. It is the guards that were put in charge of sealing the tomb and guarding it say the tomb is empty. The stone was rolled away. So here we have enemy testimony, you might say, or even soldiers that are giving the message to the chief priests. Now, while they were on their way, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priest all that had happened. So, isn't that a nice note of time that Matthew gives us? Meanwhile, while the women are doing all the things that are going on with them, these guards are also making their way back to the fortress, and they were assigned to take care of this tomb by the Jews. And the Jewish leaders, Pilate had turned them over to them to do this job. And now they've got to come and report what's happened to this tomb that they were supposed to guard and keep secure, and to report what supernatural things had happened that they had seen. And it's interesting that it says some of the guard. So then that imply that some of the others went somewhere else, and we don't know where they went. That's just something to think about. Like, where were the other? Were they just like waiting outside and you go tell them what happened and come back and tell us? Or did they go and tell some other people about it, or Pilate? Or we don't know what the other guys were doing. These guys came to the chief priests. So we get part of the story about the guard. And they give their report to what happened. The angel appeared. There was an earthquake. And, well, some have said maybe the whole town felt that earthquake. So when they say there was an earthquake and it was an angel that descended, that adds some credibility to what they're saying, because everybody would have felt that. And the stone was rolled away, and he sat upon it, and his clothes were bright, and his face was shining like lightning, and we became like dead men. We couldn't move. And then, of course, we've run away now and come to you. And the tomb, they were able to see it's empty. And the chief priests seemed to understand there's no body in there anymore, because they have to come up with some explanation for what happened to the body, because they know Jesus had foretold his resurrection. And once word gets out among the people that the body is missing, then that's going to add a lot of power to what Jesus had been saying. It's going to cause them even more trouble in trying to put down Jesus' influence. So they need to put an end to this message that the Roman soldiers have brought. There's some, again, we talked earlier about some people picture maybe these men were frozen and filled with fear when the women got there, and we don't know. Does it mention the soldiers and the women at the same time? I kind of pictured maybe they ran away, but if they were there, then they would have heard what the angel said about he's not here, he's risen. So they could have, I don't know if they could have reported that part or not. It's not really clear. But they were still standing there like stone. They would have heard that part too and could have told that. It's right that they would go to the chief priests. They were the ones that they were given this commission by. They were turned over to them, so it's right that they would go report it to them first. And also, they're the chief priests and the religious leaders there in the land of Palestine. And if anybody could explain the angel and all of these supernatural things that are going on, it ought to be the chief priests, right, that you'd go talk to. But of course, they don't. All they're interested in is covering this up. They're not interested in explaining anything about it. And I would think these men would certainly want some advice from these leaders about what to do. What do we do? We're not to let anything happen to what we're in charge of. And if you let a prisoner or somebody go, we know that you'd be put to death. It would have been a serious penalty that they would suffer that they didn't keep the tomb guarded and the stone got rolled away. So what do we do about this? You can't be expected to stand up against a supernatural being and guard it right. I mean, that would be their excuse. What could we do? You cause an earthquake, you just toss the stone away. All we could do is stand there with our mouths open and then run away. We couldn't do anything about it. So we have the facts here, and that is the seal was broken, the stones rolled away, and not the bomb, but the tomb was empty. So we got the tomb open. There's no question about that, and the priests don't question that. The body's gone. Right? So that's the fundamental fact everybody has to deal with. What happened to the body? That's not in dispute. Even the enemies agree the body wasn't there on the first day of the week. It was gone. So what happened to it? Right? And we've got the most reasonable explanation, and the one that has all of the evidence is that he was raised from the dead. That's where all of the power is. And it's really something, all of the weak excuses and reasons that the skeptics have tried to come up with to get rid of that body. But they're all so weak in comparison to what the truth is. The tomb is empty. Now, what are they going to do about this? So disappointing, human beings, and how hard-hearted these leaders have become, that no matter what kind of evidence is brought to them, they're just interested in their power, their position. This is just a problem they need to cover up some way. It not get to them at all about believing in Jesus. It is a fulfillment of what Jesus said to the rich man. Said, send Lazarus to go talk to my brothers. Right? If they see somebody raised from the dead, they'll believe, and they won't have to come to this place of torment. And Abraham said, if they won't believe the Scriptures, they're not going to believe somebody that's raised from the dead. And you would think that wouldn't be true, but it is true. And here's these men. They get the news right from these guards, and they say he was raised up from the dead, and yet all they can think about is how are we going to cover this up and keep this from spreading anywhere. They don't even seem to cross their mind they ought to believe in Jesus. So, and when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers. Of course, they tell this other story. Don't tell what really happened. So we have an emergency assembly that's called this ruling body. Whatever portion of it they can get together at a few moments' notice, they get at least maybe get some kind of quorum together of the Sanhedrin and say, we've got these soldiers here, and they brought this message about the tomb and an angel and an earthquake and empty. What are we going to do about this? What should be our procedure? So you can't just blame like the chief priests, but the whole council is guilty of this cover-up. That's sad. The Supreme Court, you think they're going to, surely they'll accept this miracle and all now that they were wrong and they shouldn't have killed Jesus. But no, let's just cover it up. And they're going to keep doing this. What we've studied in the book of Acts, they keep doing it right along. While the gospel's being preached and the apostles are doing miracles and things that they can't deny, they're just resistant. They've made up their minds not to believe. Yeah, it's just amazing. But, we're all shocked as we go through life that you can lay out the truth for certain people and they just say, I can't see it, or I'm satisfied, whatever. We get, people are that way. And it's not like out of character for human beings, because a lot of them do the exact same thing. And there's a lot of religious leaders that you think, well, their whole life is supposed to be dedicated to being a religious leader and teaching people the right way, and yet they do all these underhanded things to get their way. That's what we see here. That's what they're doing, and there's people like it are living right now, and we all have to be on guard that we don't become hard-hearted and become like that. It's something where human beings are capable of, and you can get so hard-hearted by saying no to God and the evidence that you can't see. I remember Arnold Snobel, he was a scientist, a member of the church, who wrote a book on God Has Spoken, I think is the name of the book I've got in my office. And he talked about talking to his colleagues, that were scientists and stuff, and showing them all. They said, Arnold, I just can't see it. He said, finally I decided, they just can't see it. No matter what he would show them, it didn't matter. I just can't see it. They made up their minds they can't see it. Right? And these people have to do the same thing. So here you've got this evidence, and instead of accepting it, and they try to come up with a way to deny it and oppose it. And of course, it's going to be passed on to their descendants and other people in the nation. And it's going to cause all kinds of suffering and problems because they don't obey the gospel and follow God's way. It's sad. It's a very sad thing. That's one writer talked about it as invincible blindness. They got unimpeachable testimony from soldiers with no axe to grind telling them what happened, right? It's not like one of Jesus' disciples is telling them this. And it's an undeniable report of a supernatural event, and they still won't do anything to try to cover it up. Should have been irresistibly convincing to an honest heart, but they don't have honest hearts. That's the problem. If a person was honest and would look at it and be let it in, yeah, it would convince you. But some people won't let it in. they have a prejudice. They're not going to let it pass their heart. And that's that hard soil that Jesus talked about in the parable of the sower. The devil snatches the word away, and that's it. It never gets a chance. And they've been soundly defeated. Look at all of the efforts they put forth to get rid of Jesus and his influence. They've crucified him. They had that kangaroo court to get him put to death. They ridiculed him while he was on the cross. They had him buried. They got a guard assigned to make sure nobody could take the body. And yet, you can't stop God. Right? God wins. The angel comes. The stone is rolled away. Now things are worse for them than they were before. This influence of Christ is going to go all over the world, is what's going to happen. So, the truth is a disaster for them, but they're going to pay for a lie. And as he pointed out, think about how greedy these guys are. And they pay the soldiers, it says, a large sum of money. Do people that have a lot of money, do they like giving their money away if they're greedy, covetous like Annas and Caiaphas and those guys were? I mean, they were robbing everybody trying to get money. But here they're willing to pay this big sum over because it's such a desperate situation. They see, man, this could cause everything to unravel. If these soldiers go out and start telling people what they saw, we're really going to have problems. So let's crack open the checkbook. We're going to pay for this. Yeah. And it's so often that it looks like, well, these guys are so rotten and the power of evil is so great and they've got the money and they can pay for lies and maybe they're going to win again. But no, the day of Pentecost is going to come. The Holy Spirit's going to come down. The apostles are all going to start doing miracles and they're going to lose anyway. I mean, it's like our side wins. Isn't that kind of a message you get out of all of this? That if you stick with the Lord, you're going to win in the end. You can't stop the gospel. It's not going to be stopped. The church will not be destroyed. No matter what kind of forces it looks like are out to get us, we've got somebody bigger on our side. And it's not going to stop us. It might stop us for a little while, but not in the big scheme of things. It's not. So they pay for all of this. And you can see why you would have to pay them a lot, because they're going to have to tell a big lie. We fell asleep. Roman soldiers, you're going to have to pay them a lot to say that. We fell asleep. Roman soldiers don't fall asleep. So we all fell asleep. Not just one of us. The whole group that were guarding it fell asleep. So you better get your checkbook out. You're going to get them to say that, right? And you better give them some guarantees that they're not going to get in trouble over this. So that's the next step. The question was asked by one writer. He says, how did Matthew hear of this? Right? How did he know this story? Well, we know he's guided by the Holy Spirit. I mean, that would be you could always go to that on anything. Say, well, he was just giving them, things he never saw. But there are other ways that might have come to him too. That, was Joseph of Arimathea there? Was Nicodemus? Did they hear about the meeting? Did they hear about what they did with some money? Did some of these men actually get converted later? Because we know some of the priests, many of the priests, it says in Acts chapter 6, became obedient to the faith. So some of those people could have told Matthew, you know how this whole story got started about stealing the body? They paid those soldiers to say that. That's how it got started. So there are a lot of people that could have told it. And this is what they said, you are to say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. So you think about, there's an empty tomb. They don't have the body's gone. So they can't say they don't have the body. If they had the body, they'd bring it out and go, see, Jesus is dead. So they can't, to deny the resurrection, they can't go with that. So what are we going to do? We'll blame the disciples. That's what we'll do. These dishonest guys came and stole the body. And I guess it didn't make a lot of sense to say they were so strong that they overcame these Roman soldiers and stole the body. No, nobody's going to believe that. So we'll say you were asleep and they were able to sneak up and roll this big stone away and steal the body and nobody woke up. That's It's pretty weak, isn't it? And this is the best story they could come up with. So you got the truth with all this mountain of evidence on its side, and then you got these stupid little stories like, and the books that you read by skeptics today, they have the same kind of stupid stories in them. They all hallucinated the same thing. That's one of their stories. Well, I think
what do you have on them?
One of the things, I mean, they're going to say in the next verse that we're going to cover for you. If this gets to Pilate, we'll cover for you. And really all you'd have to say is, they really didn't fall asleep, right? I mean, the chief priest could tell them that. They really didn't fall asleep. But we couldn't let this word get out, so we paid them to, and Pilate would have probably said, well, no, we can't let that get out. He might have been right down for it. So they get a promise that they're going to be backed up in this lie, right? So they take their money and win-win. It's been pointed out about how ridiculous this story is. And I preached a lot of sermons over the years, the last 45 years, on the resurrection, and read a lot of different sermons and books about the resurrection. And they always go through all of these ridiculous explanations the skeptics give and how dumb they all are. And this is the first one because it's the original, right? And on its face, it's stupid, right? We were asleep and the disciples came. If you were asleep, how do you know it was the disciples? Right on the beginning, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it might satisfy somebody that really doesn't want to believe. You go, what happened to the body? Oh, the guards fell asleep and they stole it. But somebody that's a deep thinker, is they going to accept that? They're going to go, you're telling me that these soldiers all went to sleep? I've never heard such thing as that. Not Roman soldiers. And then you're saying it was the disciples and you were asleep. So the deeper thinker is going to see right through this, right? But anyway, that's the best they got. So they're going to use it. But they paid for it. Yes.
So I
Might have had a soldier later on changed his mind about the whole thing and told what happened. We don't know. But they keep telling the story, and they're still telling it today. You can find people today telling the same story. It's not dead. Yes. That's my understanding, something like that. Certainly very severe punishment.
Yeah, I just...
the Philippian jailer was afraid of that when the cells were open.
Yeah. And all of those guarding Peter were put to death. 16 soldiers were put to death for letting Peter get away. Yeah. First it's stupid on its face, and then you think, how could they have pulled it off physically? How did they do it? They all snuck up, and it's full moon because it's full moon. That's the time of the Passover. So it's very bright outside, and all of them fell so deeply asleep that these guys came up and rolled this big stone out of the way. And then not only is it out of the way, it got taken out of the groove and was laying on the ground. That would have made a noise. So, and then the grave clothes. If you're stealing the body, do you leave the grave clothes behind, or you just grab and take off, right? The grave clothes say it wasn't that way, right? His face mask is, the cloth is folded up and laid over here on this table, and his other clothes are on the other spot. Who does that if you're stealing the body? Nope, nobody would do that. So, is that the first one? Or the second one? That's the second one? Okay. All right, next time we'll look at the cover-up, and then we get to the appearance of Christ in Galilee and the Great Commission. Appreciate your thoughts and your attention.